I'd like to introduce Sue Steele. Sue she has 38 years of experience in remote health, in mining, Indigenous health and emergency response. She's the co-founder of Red Earth Health and the Mining Emergency Response Competition. And today she's here to cut through the numbers and dive into the real return to work journey, covering pain, fatigue, mental health and support. Let's give her a big welcome.
Hello everyone. I didn't really want to follow Rebecca through her speech, but here we go. So we're doing a bit of a different perspective from my point of view. I'm a remote area nurse, I've been a safety manager, I've been an IMC, and I've been in mining sector for 30 years. So what we're going to do today is try and take you through a journey using patients as our example, because not everybody understands injury management and where it should come from. How do I explain the impact of being that nurse? How do I explain the impact MSD has on our workforce, particularly in the safety of mining? We're going to keep this simple today. I'm not one for big words. I'm certainly not one for medical words. And I shorten everything because I'm a West Australian. We're going to keep this simple by saying musculoskeletal disorders, because I can't even say that straight, is MSD. So, what do we know? We know from this morning, oh, that is a bit weird standing here, isn't it? We know from this morning that 150 disorders come from the MSD area. We know that that can be everything: bones, muscle, connective tissue, joints, wear and tear. It happens constantly in our systems. We also know that pain is relative. What does it mean? What does pain mean that's relative? It means that a sprained ankle for me might be a 10 out of 10 pain. You've all heard us talk about pain scores in our world. A sprained ankle to Miles could be 5 out of 10 because he's a lot tougher than me. So it is relative. We also know that in 160 countries surveyed, as we learnt this morning, that MSD is a leading contributor to disability. And a fun fact that we've also learnt this morning is lower back pain is the single leading cause of disability in our statistical range. So, where to from here? I'm going to introduce you to a few people today, and obviously a lot of their details have been changed for obvious reasons, and I want you to meet Sarah. So as you can see from the descriptive on the board, Sarah's a 42-year-old woman that suffered from an amputated finger in an industrial workplace. Sarah had previously raised multiple hazard reports for this piece of equipment, and 14 days post the last hazard report, she actually lost her finger in using that same piece of equipment. Sarah's recently divorced mother and has a 10-year-old child. Remember this information as we're going. I'm going to give you a little bit more about Sarah, and a patient I know very well. Has worked as an operator, trucks, loaders, scrapers and shovels for 20 years. Whilst working as an operator, Sarah studied Diploma of Safety. Sarah's the life of the party and a big personality. Sarah's well liked and respected amongst her peers. Sarah worked at her first site in her early 20s and was the only female with 600 male workers. So she's been around for a while. Let's meet our other patient. And just remember, these guys are actually real. Let's meet Joe. So Joe is a young 29-year-old male. He suffered multiple injuries in an underground accident. Basically, he was crushed. Joe's an experienced underground FIFO worker. He's recently married, has a brand new baby. What we will backfill you on with Joe is he has a fractured left elbow, fractured left tibia, fractured left ankle, multiple rib fractures. I'm not going to get into the etiology of the rest of the damage, but you get the picture. Joe's been working in the underground environment since he was 18 years old. Joe is a quiet personality, but very well liked and respected. Estimated recovery for Joe, probably about 12 months on a good day. So let's go to our initial injury. Is everyone keeping up? What's our patients' names? Exactly. So the journey from injury to recovery. I suppose one of the biggest bugbears for people like me in my world is what is the difference between injury management and claims management? There's a hell of a big difference. Injury management starts from the time you injure the person, not when the claim's put in, not when you've got to think, oh, I'm financially, and I was a safety manager for many years. It is starting from where that big red cross says, and we call it the initial treat. We should never, ever lose sight that every injury is attached to a human being, and every human being is relative. And I can't say that strong enough. Sorry, I lost my track there. Around 8 to 10 months, we can see the other big red flag in this injury recovery system. We have got to look at the chronic pain. Are we going to have prolonged pain here? That big red cross in MSD is quite significant. It sits around that 8 to 10 months for us. What we want to see is in that 12-month period, these guys are going to recover. Sarah and Joe would be back to their prime, but that's not the way it went. So let's talk about our two patients and the impacts of their initial injury. Sarah. So Sarah's pain was 10 out of 10 at the time of injury. The disruption to her life, surgery, she obviously had a stump, not being able to go home. She had a 10-year-old to pick up from school. She had no sick leave up her sleeve because she had taken it for her son's care. Her long-term thoughts started laying in that hospital bed. Can I operate machines? That's what I do for a living. Nobody from Sarah's work attended the hospital. All made contact with her during hospital, during the theatre and post-op. Nobody even offered to give her a lift home. Sarah's friends group rallied to look after her child. Sarah then had to call her own workplace and figure out what sort of workers' comp she had to apply for. So can we see what's happening to Sarah straight away? She's being isolated. Now let's talk about Joe. Joe had multiple injuries. He had 10 out of 10 pain, as we were told. His disruption to life, as Joe was extremely concerned, he's got a new baby at home and the sole caregiver for a sole income earner. Joe's supervisor, however, and treating medical person at site, medic, travelled to the hospital with him. They were with him pre-op, they were with him through diagnostics, they were with him post-op. Joe was encouraged not to worry about work, not to worry about his income. It would be sorted for him. Post-surgery, Joe was assigned an IMC, in layman's terms, injury management consultant, and a care plan, and it was put in place prior to his even leaving hospital. Joe's supervisor contacted him initially every few days, and his GM rang in twice. Well, no, that's going to be quite significant. So let me introduce you to Joe and Sarah face to face. The slide is saying to you which worker gets your support and empathy. Now let me paint a picture, because I'm a really good nurse but not so good with graphics. Sarah has got a small splint on her stump, which she hides, and hid for up to 3 years, but they'll have some significance later on. Joe, on the other hand, has a plaster cast on his arm, a moon boot on his leg, and he's got a stick. In reality, because we are visual, humans are visual, who would gain your empathy? If these guys are 1 month down the track, who would you believe was actually injured and needed 90% of their care done for them? Joe, because you visually can see it. So one of my biggest issues trying to get patients back to work and getting people to understand is actually pulling that empathy, because unless we have empathy for a patient all the way through, whether they're actually lying or not, you cannot smooth them through unless you understand them in their entirety and your workplace. So, just move to the next slide. What makes up a person? If I was to put a bubble, I'm not a psychologist. I did have a fairly significant behavioural science background. However, I'm not a researcher. I'm not educated like you guys are. I am far more comfortable in a pair of Steele cap boots and rescue overalls, to be bluntly honest. What makes up a person? I could have put, or my team could have put, 1 million bubbles in this space, because people are so complex. But if we, just in the bubbles we've put up there, have a look at even a few of them against our two patients, let's see how we go. Physical health. Sarah had a pre-employment. We always pull pre-employments when we injure somebody. It's the first thing I look at as a nurse. physically healthy, didn't carry any weight, 42 years old, non-smoker, her PEM was 100 out of 100. Perfect. So we'd go around the corner and have a look at her living situation, because this which is what makes up Sarah. So it doesn't matter how much we injured her in the MSD, what makes Sarah up is all these parts. Sarah's living situation. She actually escaped from quite an abusive marriage after 10 years, and her son had made it through. They're in a 3-bedroom home, paying a mortgage. Social status, no family whatsoever in Western Australia, only friends. If we look at now her psychological health, remembering we're 1 month down the track, not leaving the house, not taking phone calls, rarely makes it to the physio that she's organised herself. She's hiding the stump, and like I said before, she's not even looking at her hand for 2.5 years. There was no psychological factors even thought of, and the pain relief is getting out of control. She's taking Lyrica, Panadeine Forte, Aspalgin, and Panad on a very regular basis. For those of the medical world, it's pretty heavy. So, let's talk about, Joe. Joe, in the same essence, let's make up Joe in our person and our bubble in our head. Physical health, so we did the same again with Joe. Let's pull his pre-employment, because God love it, that's our measure. 100% physically fit, carrying no weight, 29 years old, really well liked. Tick. Social living situation. He rented a 3-bedroom rental in down south. He's, like I said, wife, baby, doing okay. Social status, he's got 2 sets of parents, his wife's and his, 30 minutes drive from his house. New baby, everyone's enjoying their time with him. Financial health, he's a young guy, 29, but he works in the underground, he's earning a good wage. So, what happens to that person when all those bubbles explode? What we need to do is change the way we look at people. This is the last thing I can get across today. It is we need to change. Impacts and coping mechanisms for people like Joe and Sarah, and I'll keep referring back to them because it's the easiest way to explain anything. We seek a balance to reduce the long-term impacts. What we know is we can heal the physical really quickly, generally within a few months. We all know a bone will knit within 14 days, and then we gently can bring it back. But what happens is the psychological impact of what we do right back at the start. I remember listening to Fiona Woods one day, and it just burnt in my head as a nurse, because she's an awesome lady. She said, if we just change the cool of that burn to 20 minutes, the impact 3 and 4 years down the track for that burn is just undescribable. So if we just change the psychological impact of an injury right back here, not only will our workers' comp claims drop, our MSDS stats will actually start to drop, because we're looking at the physical, not the whole person. So if we go to psychological impacts here, and let's put Sarah on top of this. She had little to no contact from the workplace, so how'd that make her feel? Worthless. She was not assigned anybody to help her negate the workers' comp system, and although we have a very robust one in this state, it's really hard to navigate when you've never had anything to do with it before, even from a workplace point of view. There's no assigned IMC. She's isolated at home. She's becoming reliant on pain medication. So what would we say to her as a safety manager 6 months' time? Oh, she's a druggie. She's addicted. But who caused that? Impacts for Joe. Supported strongly by the workplace. It was very obvious from day dot. He had an allocated IMC and a medical team. He had a wife that was brought into the picture very quickly so that she could be supportive as well. He had rehab, physio, psych appointments and pain management along his journey. So what is that telling us straight away? Coping mechanisms. So our patients are now starting to go in very different directions. And it's hard to watch if you're that person trying to manage them and report back. Sarah became more and more isolated at home, withdrawing from friends and family, not knowing where her next dollar was coming from, and beginning not to even answer her phone. She started to have neurological tics, so we started seeing this at appointments. And no neurologist in the world would tell you that came from the injury, the physical injury. Joe, on the other hand, confident his body was healing, no concern of income or job security, his supervisor would keep in contact letting him know that it's okay, we've got you here, we've got you back. Feeling better pain-wise, day by day, healing mentally and physically, the perfect patient. So, with Joe and Sarah in place, and we don't have all the answers, we need to start talking about workplace culture. Because I come from an era where when I went underground, and in my early 20s, they did the sign of the cross because I was a bad omen. So I've come from there, and don't get me wrong, I would be one of the biggest supporters of mining. Should be extremely proud of themselves, resource sector as well, for where we've come in that 30 years. But I think we need to start concentrating on the little things now, like patient minds and care. So the role of workplace culture plays hugely into patient management. Unsupportive cultures, the injured worker does not feel valued. The injured worker does not feel anything, really. The injured worker doesn't feel like they can speak up, and it can worsen their mental health. So we've now gone, in 2 cases of MSD, we've gone from quite clear-cut recoveries to now, as you can see, the journey is starting to split. Delayed recovery, particularly for Sarah. A supportive workforce is injured workers feels valued, their increased worker feel like they can speak up, they feel valued, they increase morale, and they improve recovery outcomes. That is a proven fact. I can't sit here and tell you about statistics, I just know because I'm a nurse for 30 years. So, which culture does Sarah come from? Unsupportive culture. We can see clearly in our picture now that Joe comes from that supportive culture. And I've been the safety manager trying to manage return to works and workers' comp on our mine sites. It is the hardest job to do because even myself have been heard to say, shit, am I babysitting again? It is true. It is the hard place to be. If we're talking about, sorry, I'm just losing my cards here now. If we are talking about meaningful work, if we are talking about supportive cultures, we need to start talking about where does that come from? I've worked on probably 70 different mine sites over the years, and or government. It's that role of leadership. And actually watching the slip the other day made me realise that, and this slide was already made when I saw that play, is that the critical moment in that play was the respect given from one group to another and the role of those leaders. A good leader does not have to do the job. A good leader simply has to set the bar. A good leader encourages and supports. A good leader has open communication. Now, let's look at Sarah and Joe's. I don't know whether Sarah's workplace were just too scared and they didn't understand. I don't know. I don't know that because she was the only female, they were too scared to ring her and think they were interfering. All I know is the first time we saw a manager, secretary, come to Sarah's house was 6 weeks post-op, was not announced, so it felt like they were spying. With Joe's case, he had even a GM ring him twice. It takes 5 minutes. Our modern technology might be freaking great, our systems might be great, but if you can't just pick up a goddamn phone for a human being for 5 minutes, there's something wrong with this world. So, we know that it takes a good leader to set that culture. We all know this. We've all got businesses, we've all got... It is only ever going to come from the top up, down, sorry. So, let's look at workplace systems. Let's look at... Like, I'm so used to walking. Return to work. In our safety world, we look at hierarchical controls. That is our governing mantra, and I totally I'm on that page. When you try and apply the hierarchy of controls, which is our system, to injury management, if you have a look, only fits in the orange and red down the bottom. You can't eliminate people. You can't substitute people. Mind you, robotics might take some of that one day. You literally can't re-engineer a person, can you? So where we fit in our world is that last band. And what does it say at the bottom of that? What does it say about the last band as its effectiveness in our workplace? It's limited, right? So what we need in our world, and we've got so many of them in our safety systems, is a robust system. And I'm talking about an injury management system. I'm not talking about a claims management system, because 99% of the companies I go to have got sound claims management, sound insurance. I'm talking about how you manage people when they're hurt, right from here. I'm talking about early intervention. Fiona Woods. Doesn't matter if it's a burn or a person, it's the early intervention that matters. Communication with the worker. I'm not talking about emails, I'm not talking about text. I'm talking about picking up a phone or seeing somebody face to face. The amount of smiles you see from a patient when it just has a senior person from their office walk in is crazy. Just the little effect. Our return to work problems. Our return to works are so hard to manage, because we have to give these people meaningful work. We have to keep them engaged. But we're a FIFO site, you've got a moon boot on and a plaster cast. How's that going to work? If I'm a contractor, it's 10 times worse, because the principal doesn't want you on their site. Fair call. They're not being assholes. That's a fair call, because you then come under their insurance. So how do we get around that? How do we actually get somebody engaged in work? Because we know mentally, if an MSD patient is engaged earlier than later, their return to work is 75% greater. Everyone knows that. So how do we get them back there? I don't have the answers. I'm at around 30 years. We might have come a long way, but return to work is our biggest issue, and giving them meaningful work. I don't want to send an engineer who spent his lifetime studying to Bunnings, because that's all I've got to fill his day. I don't need to fill his day, I need to keep him engaged with his workforce, if that makes sense. So, we need the systems. Oh, absolutely we do. We need to look at how we manage our systems and how we actually, what staff we get to use them, and that's so hard for small companies. I run my own company. It is hard when you're a small player. Oh, sorry. I'm not great with these machines. So how do we do it? We're going to have to learn to build resistance. Stop looking at the injury and start looking at the person. You employed them. They come as so many different facets. We need a holistic approach to workers. And when I used to hear that word in my nursing school all those years ago, centuries ago it feels like, holistic, what a stupid word. We'll never see that used in my environment. It's actually true. Look at the whole person, physically and mentally. That's what we should be doing. I just don't know what the answer is or how to get there. So in summary, let's have a look. Robust systems, we've already described them. They've been described to us all morning. Early intervention and communication, and I mean communication is face-to-face or phone-to-phone. Supportive workplace cultures. You will never change anything unless you have a great culture. Empathetic leaders. You don't always have to believe, but you have to show empathy to people that are suffering. Gradual and flexible return to work, and mental health wellbeing. And I don't mean let's throw on some mental health first aid courses and yay, we've ticked that box. It's not about ticking boxes, it's about understanding. I know that sounds blunt, but you hear it over and over and again. If you're going to tick a box, you might as well get out of the business in my books. Anyway, stop looking at the injury, start looking at the person. I'm going to give you a little bit of a what's the final ending for Sarah and Joe. We'll look at time here. I've never been a good timekeeper. I'm a typical nurse. For Sarah, actually I know it, I don't need to say it. So the end story for Sarah. Sarah is now, we are 11 years down the track. I was brought in to look after Sarah as a pro bono because a friend felt that we're way out of their depths. Unfortunately, I didn't get involved in this case till 2 years up. So, What happened to Sarah? She still has the tics today, 11 years later. She is able to look at her hand now. We actually massage our hand now. We can do that. Her son is now in counselling. He's in his 20s. Must be in his 20s now. He's in his 20s now. So, good news story for Sarah as we talked her into restudying and becoming an IMC, because she had that deep-seated empathy for what she knew. So her life ended up being okay, but we ended up on an 11-year journey just because nobody treated the person at the first part. Joe, 12 months back at work, having another baby in that 12 months, so how injured was he really? Anyway, really well respected, supervisor in a mine site, hasn't looked back, was really, really, really happy with his work, and so he was a good news story for our workers' comm system. We say, look, don't report it, because like these guys look after you. So that's my story. Let's start treating the person, not the injury. That's it.
Thanks, Sue. Stop looking at the injury and start looking at the person. Can you answer a couple of questions that have come up on Slido for us?
Maybe.
An attempt. There's one here. Remote and regional workers are often isolated from metropolitan-based organisations. What is the best practice to offering remote support for injured workers?
Yep. So, sorry, you're referring to people that actually live in remote area?
Yes.
I'm not an expert, so I'm just going to give you an opinion on what we do. It's called a welfare check system. You shouldn't have anybody in a camp and or a remote area, small environment, unless you're checking on them. In the initial phases of injuries, we generally rule of thumb will check them every goddamn day because they need it. But then it'll move out to 2 weeks, 3 weeks, depending on the thing. It's exactly the same in remote areas. As long as they're hearing a voice and stay engaged and you have a system in place, that's how we would manage it.
Okay. Just one for the road. Once an injured worker has felt unsupported and has a negative view of the workplace, how can we fix this? How do we involve them in prevention strategies? I know it's a big question.
Oh, that's huge.
In 30 seconds or less, and go.
I've researched this for 30 years. I know all the answers. No, I don't know all the answers. Look, all I'll say is, I'm going to use an example of that. We were asked to put the private model of mining and the way we manage injuries over the top of a government organisation at the time was $42 million in the red. The only thing we did differently is we interviewed every single patient. And over 50% of them had never actually spoken to a human about their case. So 2 months later, when they did the stats for this department, $9 million already in the savings. I mean, this is ridiculous, and it's not hard. You know, like I send a text to my kids in the theatre, so I'm just as bad as them. We've got to stop using the technology and start treating people.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Sue. Let's give her another big round of applause. Thank you very much.